Welcome to the Feminine Subconscious podcast. I am so excited to have Kristen Ulmer here with us. I met her at a Friendsgiving just last week, but her story and her life and the way that she's lived her life was just so mind-blowing and exciting that I wanted to interview her and just get to know her more. Kristen was formerly named the best female big mountain extreme skier in the world for 12 years. She's now a high performance facilitator and author of The Art of Fear, a book which radically challenges existing norms about what to do about fear and anxiety. She works with groups and individuals all over the world. Some of her clients and keynotes include Google, Citigroup, Olympic athletes, the Oslo Freedom Foundation Forum, the Human Rights Foundation, and the U.S. Air Force. This is just the tip of the iceberg of who Kristen is. So welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige. And I just want to acknowledge that we can tell you have a cold. Thank you for showing up, regardless.
Yeah, you can hear it in my voice. So
it's very charming, though.
You're sweet. You're sweet. I just thought it was so fascinating at the Friendsgiving. The way that you started was, when I was a teenager, I would stand in the mirror naked and I would just look at myself. And I thought, you went on to tell the most incredible, mind-blowing stories that I want to give you an opportunity to share some of those. But I thought, how do you think that programmed your mind in a way to see yourself different than most girls? You showed up in the world so different than most human beings, but especially women, because I know as a teenager, I'd look at myself for a minute and almost look away. And I'm just curious about that. Tell me more about that.
Well, I'll start by saying I didn't realize that was unusual until I did a spiritual exercise one day with a group of about 20 women, and we all took our bras off and put them in a pile, and then we picked out each other's bras, and then we had to tell a story of our relationship with our breasts. And I went last, and normally I go first, and I'm glad I waited because one by one I watched 19 women go up and talk about how much they hate their breasts, about how much they're too small, they're too big, they're too saggy, they're too this, whatever. And I was, wow, I really have the radical opposite. And I got up and I talked about how I used to stare at myself when I was a teenager. I still do this now today, maybe not for 2 hours when I was 14, but I would stare in the mirror and think, oh my gosh, my body, my breast, everything. I'd look at my butt for an hour. I'm looking at that angle, and I'd dance. And I mean, my parents had to have known I would have music. Anyway, it's kind of embarrassing to think about now, but even now at age 58, when I'm about to get naked with maybe a new man, I'm single right now, I'll take off my shirt and be like, that's literally how I feel about my body even today, even though I'm definitely not 14 anymore. And I honestly didn't know that was unusual.
How does that impact the way you show up in the world? Having that kind of body confidence that then you went on to be on the national ski team and you were the top athlete in the world in your sport. And how do you think it impacted your confidence?
Well, different than you think. When I was I'm a mindset sports coach, thought leader. I help people with fear and anxiety issues now. And I've been running these ski camps called the Art of Fear ski camps for the last 22 years. And what I used to teach is the thing that I was interviewed about when I was a professional athlete. What does it take to be a world-class athlete? And I would say the same thing every time, which is radical self-expression. And I realize now that's just who I am. That's just who I was born to be. I'm actually writing a couple more books right now. One of them is called Innate Drivers, What You Live and Die For. And my number one innate driver that I came out of the womb caring about is radical authenticity, which can also manifest as radical self-expression, the authenticity expressed externally, which is what I did in skiing, which is what I do at Burning Man. And if I authentically felt I was gorgeous, then I wanted to express that by dancing and doing whatever and strutting. I actually want to create some workshops called Strut, find your inner badass and express it in the world. Now, that is me. And I think that what helps people have confidence is to really understand what their innate drivers are that they came out of the womb caring about, that they are here to absolutely be 100%. The world doesn't need another Kristen, right? The world needs another you, Paige, or whomever's listening. And if you can figure out exactly what you came out of the womb caring about and what your innate gifts are, and if you are to own them completely, then that'll give you the confidence that you want. And then the second piece is my relationship with fear is a really healthy relationship. It's not always been healthy, but extreme skiing is the consequences of failure or death or injury. And so that's the kind of skiing I was doing that I was the best in the world at. I basically risked my life for a living. So what was my relationship with fear? The belief is that people like me are fearless, but it's actually the radical opposite of that. What I have is a love affair with fear. It's I seek it out, And that's not to say that I seek out being scared or afraid, because I've actually never felt scared or afraid in my life, except for one time a snake jumped on me, but that's, anyway. My relationship with fear is one of intimacy with fear. And so the fear manifests as excitement, presence, focus. And I'm also radically authentic about the fact that it's there and that I like it. And so I think that the combination of those two things is having a really healthy relationship with fear and actually a healthy relationship with your own mind, being in flow with it versus trying to control it, which I really want to talk about next. And also figuring out who you are authentically and going all the way with whatever that is, because somebody else's authentic self is just all about humbleness or humility, or another person is all about security or safety. Just figuring out exactly who you are and then going all the way with that, including the fear and the thoughts that go along with it.
That's so powerful and beautiful. I love the idea that we're just here to figure ourselves out. There's so much of just self-discovery, as a hypnotherapist, it's so exciting to guide people into their own minds and discover really deeply who they are. And it's so different for everyone. And for you, it was jumping off cliffs and flying through the air and helping people step into their full expression of themselves and strut and those kind of things. And other people, it's being a doctor, or it's so beautiful that the world goes around because we're all so different. The one thing that I find I have fear around, I feel physically I'm pretty fearless, but emotionally I get into a place of fear where I get frozen after so many breakups, just going emotionally into another relationship, or losing my dad, terrifying for me in a way that breast cancer was kind of, oh, okay, they're going to cut me open. I'm going to get surgery. I'm going to be fine. Or I broke all my ribs, and it was like running up and sprinting hills or doing a hard workout. Those kind of things nothing kind of bothers me physically. But then there's a kind of terror that I feel around falling in love again or losing someone that I love. And what would you say to that?
My first thought is just absolutely, of course you should be feeling that, period. And then I literally could say nothing more, and just melting into that understanding that there's nothing wrong with you, that you have this fear. But I'm of course going to give you a longer answer than that. You could look at it in terms of two different mathematical equations, both which involve fear. So there's fear. Let's start with fear. And fear is with us every moment of every day and every interaction we have. And it doesn't even need a reason to be there. It could be just totally cosmic, but there's regular everyday life fear. There's fear that comes from trauma, things that happen. And nobody is getting through life without trauma, often a lot of it, with more to come, right? And then there's fear that comes from choosing to do bigger things with our lives, starting a business, having a baby, getting into a new relationship, getting divorced. And then there's a fourth provocation, which is fear that we can't even understand where it comes from, that is all around us in the form of plants and animals and trees and rocks and ancestral fear and things that we're not even going to be able to understand. And, you know, a lot of times people try to understand, what is it that I'm afraid of? Well, another thing is that fear rarely shows up as scared or afraid. It's just any kind of emotional discomfort, or it could even be physical that we have in our body. And we think if we can understand where it comes from, somehow we can control it. But that we're never going to be able to understand where it comes from, is my point. And we have fear every moment of every day, in every interaction we have, no exceptions. And most of us are in denial of this. A lot of people say, oh, we're all about love. Well, yeah, but we're also all about fear. And we've lost sight of that, which is where the equations come in. So fear everywhere. And the number in both of my equations on the level of fear that we have in our lives is not changeable. We cannot control our fear at all. I mean, we can maybe for a moment blow up a single asteroid in the sky, right? But how much does that affect the universe? And we could try to understand we're never going to be able to understand the universe. We're never going to be able to understand fear. And so stop trying, right? It's just there. Just know that's there. That's what we can understand. So fear. And then there's our relationship with fear. And 8 billion people on the planet, 8 billion different relationships with fear. And what I see is you have an avoidant relationship with fear. I already have enough fear. I don't want any more. I'm not going to date, or I'm going to isolate maybe. So the relationship is some sort of resistance to fear, kind of an unwillingness to feel fear. Fear doesn't hold anybody back from doing anything. This is a big point I'm about to make. It's our unwillingness to feel fear that holds us back. And and fear is not making you freeze. You are freezing in the face of fear. Oh, fear, problem, something wrong with me. So there must be something wrong with the situation. I need therapy. You can't therapy fear away. But usually when people fight fear, conquer and overcome it, or they run away from fear, or they freeze in the face of it, or all of those things, it's their reaction to fear that is causing them to do that, not the fear itself. So first equation.
So good.
Yeah. Suffering equals, or we could call it anxiety, which is a new name for fear, equals fear times resistance.
Yeah.
And there are 8 billion ways to relieve. Some people drink, some people take medication, anxiety medication, resisting fear by medicating in a way. Some people are living so much in their heads that they don't have to feel anything. Some people make themselves really busy. All of the treatments for anxiety and anxiety disorders involve some form of resistance. Meditation, trying to replace the fear with calm, or breathing exercises, exercising, going in nature, all these things that we do to deal with our fear or anxiety are actually ways to not deal with it. And to fear, which I love to personify, running away from it by drinking alcohol, or running away from it by doing yoga every day, it's exactly the same thing. Nobody's dealing with their fear. We have all these coping mechanisms, whether it be alcohol or yoga or meditation. And I mean, yoga is great. Alcohol is great. Meditation is great, but not as ways to deal with fear. So suffering equals fear times resistance. And pretty much everybody's in a resistant relationship with fear, because that's what we're taught to do in society, and even by the experts. So I'm really trying to undo
beautiful. How, when I expressed your fear, you were like, yeah, and that makes total sense. Okay, so I guess what you're saying is, when you feel fear, to just go, yeah, hi, fear. I see you, and I feel you, and thank you, almost. Or how do you create a relationship where you're in partnership with it rather than resisting it and trying to push it away? How do you, it's because fear plus love equals peace, or what is it?
And you've already kind of landed on the second equation.
Okay.
So suffering equals fear times resistance. My word is flow.
Yeah.
Equals fear times intimacy. So if we can shift from resistance which causes suffering. And actually, the awful feeling we associate with fear actually isn't even fear. It's our resistance to feeling it. I don't want to feel this. There's something wrong with me. I know, right?
Yes.
If we can switch from resistance to fear to intimacy with fear, that's what extreme athletes do when they're performing at their very, very best. And it is also the solution to anxiety disorders, insomnia, anger issues, depression, and blah, blah, on and on and on. But we're not taught that. Even the treatments for all these problems, there's more resistance, or running away from. So my work is about shifting people from resistance to intimacy. And it's a process and how you go about going through. And it's the same thing with your own mind, by the way, because I know this podcast is about mastering your mind. Well, see fear as a person. Here's fear, right? And let's say, here's your mind. And there's you in the middle. And it's okay. Let's say this is mine. I'm going to master you. If you say that to another person, they'll F you. No. What, are you trying to control me? No, I'm going to manipulate you. I want you to be exactly what I want you to be. It's going to rebel. Same with fear. If we try to control either of these two people, our own minds and fear, it is going to consume our lives. We think that we have some success. We're never going to be able to control our minds. I mean, and we're taught this by almost everyone, create your reality, train your brain. But when you pick a fight against your mind or try to make it into what you want it to be, kind of if you tried to do that with your neighbor, they're going to rebel and you're going to have some wars going on. They're going to be carried out in your own body. And so much better is if you can learn if you have a thought, just have the thought. And this is very Zen. If you have the feeling, the discomfort, just have the feeling, just feel it, without trying to change anything. And you're just kind of going with the flow of your thoughts, going with the flow of your fear. How do you get there, though? When we've been taught to control our thoughts and master our mind. We have 50 thoughts per minute times 60 times 24. How many thoughts is that in a day? That's because you still have thoughts while you're sleeping. How many of those can we actually control?
Yeah.
Maybe if we're lucky. And then whatever thought we thought we controlled today just comes back twice as strong the next day because it's now in rebellion. So rather, back to these two, we got to shift. First of all, let's apologize to them. Sorry, mind. Sorry, fear. Oops. Right. How can I learn how to have a healthy, loving, flowing relationship with these two permanent roommates that live in my own body? And if you can learn how to do that, feel your feelings and think your thoughts, and that's it. It's a lot simpler, and you don't get stuck in some sort of pattern that repeats itself over and over again that's really unhealthy, that comes from the resistance to it in the first place.
Yeah, fascinating. I read that there's 70,000 thoughts today, and 95% of them are the exact same as the day before, right? And for most people, like 90% of those are negative, or 80% of those are negative thoughts. So, but the resistance is really a fascinating one, where I keep thinking of how do you get into intimacy? And it's actually back to the beginning of like being embodied and being vulnerable, right? Like it's going into the tenderness of being human rather than, I know when I'm in that resistance, I actually disassociate kind of from my body so I don't feel so many emotions. I've realized that I can think of everything, or even in my work, I hear really traumatizing stories and I don't bring it into my life, but I don't bring it into my body. So I have this kind of way of going into a place of non-feeling. And it's the exact opposite of being so embodied and intimate with life.
Yeah, and a lot of us are checked out, And let me tell you a story of a time that I got it right during my ski trip. So I was asked to compete in the first ever big mountain extreme skiing competition in America. And I really didn't want to do it. I was considered the best in the world. If I didn't win this thing, it would be really bad for my reputation. I didn't like being in the gate. I had been on the US ski team for moguls, and I did not thrive there, and I did not want to be in the gate. I was more interested in filming movies, but they paid me to go there and compete because they wanted to make their first competition a legitimate competition. So 3-day competition, about 160 guys and 40 girls. And I said, if I didn't win, a lot was at stake: my reputation, my sponsors, all that, my identity. So 3-day competition, elimination each day until it was the last day. And there were 30 guys and 6 girls left. And it was the best of one, both 2 runs. The best run score, was your score. And I played it safe. I did not step out of my comfort zone. I wasn't in the mood for fear, and after the first run, I was not in first place. And this girl, Kim, was, and she was so mean and so awful and to me and just a difficult person. And I knew I was a better skier, but I played it safe and she didn't. She took risks. She said yes to fear that first run. I didn't. So I had 2 hours to think about it. And you can imagine the thought process, the emotion and the pressure, right? And I was angry at myself for women out. I had a lot of fear because there was so much at stake. I had imposter syndrome going on. Maybe I'm not as good as I think I am. I was embarrassed, like really embarrassed. And all of my wounds and, for my child, everything is just triggered. My brain is like going crazy. And I had 2 hours. And because I had intimacy with all of it, my wound, my fear, my embarrassment, my imposter, my head, my thoughts, drop by drop, I became a mighty river. I wasn't in resistance to any of it. And so there was no suffering. Only there was flow. Flow equals whatever you're feeling or dealing with plus intimacy. And the anger and the fear helped me pick a line that involved a 70-foot cliff drop. And this is in 1991 on skinny skis onto hard pack. Think about that. The Powder magazine called it 70 feet. It wasn't 70 feet. It was maybe 35. So it's like it just made me stronger and stronger and stronger and more resolved and more energized and more like, oh yeah, well, watch this. And by the time I got in the gate, 3, 2, 1, go. Mighty River pushes off, and I nailed this run. And not only did I take first place for the women, but I took 4th place overall out of 160 men. And Kim took 2nd place for the women, and she took 63rd out of 160 men. The difference was profound. So the suffering comes from the belief that this negative thought I'm having is a problem to be solved. If you have a negative thought, just have a negative thought. It's not that big of a deal. If you feel uncomfortable emotionally, just feel uncomfortable emotionally. It's the belief that we have to fix this or there's something wrong that causes it to keep going. We hear this quote, whatever you resist persists. We know this quote. Everybody's heard this, and yet that's what we do. And we have podcasts about it, and we go to therapists like, gotta fix this. I've got to fix this. Okay, I got to train my brain to not have a thought anymore. Guess what? You've just trained your brain to be scared of that thought and gives it magical powers, and it just keeps coming back around and around and around. And it's like, this is the negative thought, right? Back to personifying. It's like, no, go away. No, I'm going to change you. I got to change you, versus it's counterintuitive to then actually turn towards it and be like, okay, sweetheart, what's going on?
Yeah, I always think of children when they're having a temper tantrum, right?
Yeah.
And if you just be quiet, let's get out of here. And they'll get worse and worse and worse. Unless just getting down on the ground with them, hey bud, what's going on? And they're like, like, okay, let's cuddle. And then you just hold them for a little bit. And 2 minutes later, they're off and running again, right? But if we just try, stop it, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And the way I define suffering is just cycling thoughts. Suffering is just when we stay in a thought pattern over and over and over.
Well, it's not the thought process going round and round and round that causes the suffering. It's our resistance to the thought process. It really has to be clear that the thought process is not happening to us. We're creating it by being in resistance to it. Because if you have a thought and you don't allow yourself to think it, it's just going to keep screaming at you in order to get your attention. And, a lot of people are listening to this instead of watching it. I'm holding up a glass of water. Let's say this is the thought. I just took a sip of water, right? That was the analogy I was using. If we can do that, but there has to be a period after that. It has to be like, okay, I'm just going to have this thought. I'm going to have intimacy with this thought. I'm going to spend a moment connecting with this thought, period. Not, okay, comma, now I'm going to let it go. All right, I had my moment of connecting with it. Now I'm going to let it go. Nobody in the history of the world has ever let go of anything, and it'll never happen. It's the worst advice ever. Can we just let it be? Or can we just let go and go with the thought? And we worry that if we go with the thought, then it'll just kind of become this monkey on our back or demon that just takes over our lives. If you give it an inch, we give it a mile. That's why it's so counterintuitive. Like fear, I have worked my butt off, somebody may say, to replace fear with calm or not have so much fear. And if I allow myself to feel it, then it's going to take over my whole life. I can't go there. Same with the thought. But that's why it keeps saying it's counterintuitive. But if we actually decide to do something completely different, completely out of the normal, what we're taught, and instead of trying to train our brain, just give it a wide pasture, let it do its thing with love and support. See what happens. Instead of trying to control the thought, the fear, the wound, any of that, just give it a wide pasture, period. Not give it a wide pasture for 5 minutes and then say, okay, buddy, let's sit, I'll hug you. Now let's go get ice cream. No, just sit with it, period. And think about it in terms of your analogy of a child. Like if a child is, I'm afraid, I feel fear. If you say, okay, let's sit and feel fear together, period. No shaming. No, there's nothing to be afraid of. That's not true. There's lots to be afraid of. But if you just treat your wounds, your thoughts in your mind, you would treat a child when your best motherhood moment, like let's just sit here and have this thought together, period. That's it.
So just to pivot a little, women being kind of the physically weaker species, I've seen Tony Robbins, for example, they'll have a group of men and say, who here in the room out of the men have felt fear for their safety in the last week, 2 weeks, months, and not even half the room is up until childhood, right? But she'll have the women say, who here has felt unsafe for their physical safety in the last 24 hours? And there will be 20% of the room stands up. What about the last week? Another 20%. By the time it's at 6 months, almost the entire room has stood up. And then you told me how you did a solo bike trip through India by yourself, and the things you've done by yourself as a woman that are so unbelievably fearless that women just don't do. Women are afraid to drive and get their own gas some places, and you're biking through India or traveling all over the world on your own as a single woman. And I'm just curious, what's the difference? What's the difference? How, walk me through the process where you show up in such a fundamentally different way. Are you not recognizing that, fundamentally you're a stronger woman than most women? You could probably take on some men, but their muscle mass is still 50% more dense than yours. On a guy that's smaller than you, that doesn't even work out as much as you, could probably hold you down, right? So how do you show up in the world in such a fearless way when there is fundamental danger? There are some bad guys out there, or
right.
Humans.
So no one's fearless. I'm not fearless. It just comes back to the resistance versus embracing, we'll call it this time, instead of intimacy. I have a radical love affair with fear. And it's a source of aliveness for me. And, when I think in terms of a man assaulting me, I mean, maybe it could happen, but I think that most men I was one time in Morocco walking on a beach at night, and all of a sudden I started getting followed by 4 men, and one of them was holding a board behind his back, sorry. And I had the thought, awesome, game on. Like, and I just started walking more athletically and more tougher. And it was a construction zone. And I'm like, pole vaulting over some of the scaffolding. Cause this is an Islamic country and they're probably not used to women like me, and then I thought that would scare them off. Okay, this is a dangerous animal. We really don't want to mess with her, right? And then they didn't back off. And so finally I turned around and I yelled at them and is it okay if I swear?
Yes.
I'll say the F word. Are you looking at, what do you have behind your head back? It's a board. What are you going to club me upside the head? Fuck you. Right. And I'm in their face and, and they're backing up. They've never seen anything like this. And then I keep walking and keep in mind, it's dark. There's nobody else around. And this went on for, I don't know, 5-10 minutes. And I turned around and yelled at them 2 more times. And eventually they backed off. And it was the best part of my trip. That's just my approach to fear. It's like, I love it. I say yes to fear. And it's me plus fear equals super me. It's like I'm Batman and fear is Robin and we're stronger together than apart. I'm not fearless. I just have a radical love affair with fear. And I don't think that if this was when I was younger, I think I was 32 when that happened. I'm 58 now. Like if that happened now, I'm sure I would go back to the old, but I don't actively seek out or get a thrill out of fearful experiences anymore. My book is called The Art of Fear. I was originally going to call it My Love Affair with Fear. And that's really the only difference. I think that most women are in resistance to fear, and that's actually what weakens them.
My mind is being blown right now.
So imagine you have the traditional number in Zen is 10,000. So let's say you have 10,000 children, your mother, and half your children you've named love, joy, gratitude, forgiveness, and the other half of your children you've named fear, anger, I'm not enough, despair. Despite your best intention as a mother, would you be able to treat all your children the same way?
No.
Right? And so we live in a culture that says positivity at all costs. And we love and nurture and show off to the world our love, joy, and try to cultivate that. It's beautiful. I understand why people do it. But what do we do with these children over here? We try to control them. We try to master them. We try to get rid of them. We try to replace them with love. You choose love over fear. But the thing is, they're never going to go away. They're part of the human experience. Then whatever you resist persists, right? You put them down in the basement. What are they doing down there? They're down there with no love, no sunshine, no oxygen. They're freaking out. And they are doing everything they can to burn the house down in order to get out. And they will not be denied. And especially one as strong as your wound or your fear or your anger, right? They'll become a shadow, that takes over your life. And at this point, I would say that 95% of most people's personalities are dependent on their relationship with fear. Let's say somebody is really arrogant and stoic. They've become that to not deal with their fear with men. Or if a woman is all about safety and comfort, she maybe has become that to try and limit her fear. A lot of our life choices, not dating you were bringing up before, come from our relationship with fear. And we can devote 95% of our energies to just keeping these children in the basement, and nurturing love and gratitude and all that. And we don't realize how much it's consuming our lives. And it doesn't work. We think we're all love and light, but it's not working. But that's what almost every self-help guru is teaching right now. So that's my job. There's a lot of people that have an opinion about fear. Almost everybody's opinion about fear is conquering or overcoming it or fighting it or choosing something more positive. Or, nature didn't get it wrong. We are supposed to be having this fear, and it is one of the greatest experiences we get to have here on planet Earth. It's just, we're so conditioned to be in resistance to it and lock it in the basement and throw away the key. And almost our entire society is dictated by people's compromised relationship with fear at this point. Most people are like monkeys throwing their fear at other people. I'm not dealing with it. I'm going to make you deal with it for me. So our relationship with fear is the most important relationship of our lives, because it's the relationship that we have with our own bodies, with the nature of life itself, all of that. And so I'm probably the expert on what to do about fear in the world right now, which I'll tell you is not saying very much, because there's nobody willing to call themselves an expert on fear. Everybody has an opinion about it.
Yeah.
Everybody has an opinion on what to do about anxiety, which is another name for fear. It's exactly the same thing. We just don't want to call it fear anymore because there's such a stigma. So I'm probably the only one, because we believe that people who are experts on fear are fearless and can teach people how to be fearless. Nobody is willing to say that about themselves. So as a fear expert, I'm just trying to get people to be honest about their fear and learn how to connect with their fear in an honest way. Take it out of the basement, invite it into their lives, give it a sandwich, give it some love and some sunshine, and then see how much easier life becomes. And then it's not about trying to control 70,000 thoughts a day and fear that's with us all day, every day, and to replace it with love and gratitude, which, oh my gosh, it sounds like torture and it doesn't work. So can we reimagine this? And that's what I'm here on this planet to help people do.
Amazing. One thing I know, when I was going through my divorce, there was so much fear about what the future was, right? And so I kind of came to the conclusion that fear is a liar. Fear lies to me about it tells me that if this happens, I'm going to be in the fetal position and never be able to get out of bed again. If this happens, I'm going to die. That's the message that I often get from fear. And then when I actually step out of the fear and look around, I go, oh, that's a liar. It's not telling me the truth about what the future is. And so what do you think of that? It's just like this philosophy that I came up with just because I kind of started looking at when I was in a really fearful situation. It wasn't a worst case scenario in my mind. My experience of fear is that it tells me with absolute certainty that something's going to happen, when if I just step through the fear and do it anyway, it doesn't ever happen that way.
Well, we're lying to ourselves in thinking that we can get rid of fear. Fear is not a liar. When you have a compromised relationship with fear, which it sounds like you do, if you're calling this person that lives in your body a liar, they're going to fight back, and you're going to have a war going on with them, and they're going to turn up the dial big time on those crazy thoughts. They're going to invade your mind. Fear, actually, if you're in flow with it, it doesn't ever get into your thoughts. It just stays in your body. There's a whole bunch of science behind that. Anyway, I know that that's what people are taught, that fear is a liar and that we got to fight this mighty war. And there's wars in Ukraine and Gaza, but the biggest war we're fighting that trumps that one by a millionfold is the own war that we have with fear being carried out in our own bodies, in pretty much all 8 billion of us. Yeah, so science has shown fear comes from the amygdala. The amygdala is not a thought-producing part of the brain. It's the manufacturing plant for fear. And if there's a threat, it'll manufacture fear. But to the amygdala, everything's a threat. So we just have fear all the time. And it's scientifically proven. It shows up in our bodies, and it's supposed to flow like water through our bodies and provide on-point, intuitive physical reaction in the form of fight, flee, or freeze. And it's brilliant. It's a perfect design as long as we're in flow with it. And it doesn't ever invade our thoughts. But because of Dad saying there's nothing to be afraid of, because of the message that fear is a liar, because of the, choose love over fear, all of those things nobody's in flow. It's just our cultural norms. And I don't know where it came from. We could speculate, but we're almost all in resistance to fear. And so we kink the hose. And the hose stops the flow. And then the fear, with nowhere else to go, either turns into anxiety, which is stuck fear in our body that even though there's seemingly no threat, it's just going round and round because it has no place else to go. It'll turn up the dial on itself. Worry, is another name for fear. Or it'll flood into our thoughts and invade our minds. Because if we're living in our minds as a way to not deal with the fear, well, it'll meet us there because that's the only place it can get our attention. So it'll take over our minds. In a war between fear and the mind, fear will always win. And so it'll just start making itself known there. And basically what fear is doing in the mind is pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me, pay attention to me. Because that child that's being neglected, it's like it will not be denied. It will keep on yelling now in our thoughts until and unless we turn towards it and spend some time with it and have a loving, inclusive relationship with it. It'll wake us up in the middle of the night if we're really good at blocking it out during the day, and on and on. Or the third way it could show up is it can show up and get really clever, redirected in other ways that don't even seem like fear anymore, like jealousy or anger. Anger is in many ways just fear's fight energy. And maybe anger isn't even an emotion. It's just fear's fight energy. Or if you're really good at blocking out fear and really good blocking out anger, it'll show up as incredible sadness. And next thing you know, you're depressed. Or you could go numb to not feel it, and which is another form of depression. So, if you have a compromised, kink-hosed relationship with fear, it will mess your life up and show up in your thoughts and all these other ways. But if you unkink the hose and get back in flow with fear again, and it doesn't take much, you just have to do it today. You don't have to relive any past traumas or anything. Just unkink the hose today. Find the fear in your body and connect with it in an intimate way, period. Resist the urge to add some resistance at the end, ironically. Just connect with it. Then it won't wind up showing up in this erratic way. And so what you're describing is fear is so crazy and irrational, and it's obviously the problem, but we don't realize that we've picked a fight with it, causing it to behave that way.
So walk me through the process. Like, someone's looking at getting divorced, they're terrified. The thought is, oh my gosh, I'm going to ruin my life. I'm going to ruin my children's lives. I'm not going to be able to get up in the morning. Seeing him with someone else is going to be so terrorizing to my spirit. I feel I'm going to die, jealousy, all of these things, right? Those projections of the future of fear. And so she's feeling all that. She's in it, right? She's feeling it. So instead of going distract, push away, make it a liar, whatever it is, she just turns right to it and goes, hey, yeah, we're really scared right now. Is that right? Walk me through the process. What does she do when her whole body's kind of in this total fear state?
Well, that's how to react to fear, but also change your perspective about the fear. The fear is there to help get you out of that bad situation. Fear and intuition are basically the same thing. Let's say she has fear if she stays, and she has fear if she goes. Because there's fear if you ski the moguls, there's fear if you don't ski the moguls, there's fear if you start the business, there's fear if you don't start the business. There's fear if you leave the house, there's fear if you don't leave the house. It doesn't matter what you do, what kind of choices you make, there's always going to be fear there. And so people poo-poo fear-based decision-making. But if we don't invite our fear into the decision-making process and we're just using our minds or our rational minds, we become like we're blind in one eye and we have no depth perception. So if we actually learn how to listen to our fear, it's like, okay, if she was my client, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, how afraid are you of leaving? And all that implies, all the stuff you just mentioned. She'd say a level 10. Okay. How about if you stay? On a scale of 1 to 10, how big is your fear if you stay? So it's a level 5 if I stay. She's probably going to stay, And then she'd check in the next day, and maybe he was erratic that day, and the fear of staying is maybe now a 10 as well. So it's 10 against 10. Like, and then that's new information. And then one day there's the fear of going is now a 9 and the fear of staying is a 10. You have to keep paying attention to your fear and helping you make the decision that should be made. Now, I used to think that just whatever the lesser fear is wins, but sometimes the thing that has more fear, if you're in the mood for growing and learning, you want to choose that instead. And often it just has to do with the question. This is a really good question for people to ask. Am I in the mood for fear today? I had a friend call me this morning who's he's like, I think I'm going to get a divorce, right? But I just can't deal with it. And he has fear if he stays, fear if he goes, but all of a sudden it's less fear if he goes, but it's still a level 10, but it's just something that he's willing to feel in order to someday maybe have less fear. I mean, there's so many conversations that can be going on. So it's not a matter of just turning towards your discomfort, but actually seeing the wisdom that it's here to offer us and the insight and the intuition. I mean, it's just absolutely brilliant. My fear kept me alive during my ski career. It made me a spectacular athlete. The fear, because I was feeling it, I was in my body instead of in my head. I'm lower center of gravity. It made me react intuitively. Like animals are really, really in touch with their fear and they become uber athletes, And so me being in touch with my fear, I'm in my body. I'm like a cat out there in the mountains, right? Can you get that to that place with your fear when you're going through a divorce too? And help you stay alert and alive and also connect you to the nature of life. And I just went through a divorce too. And it still is like, I have so much fear. I'm alone. I have all these responsibilities. It's just overwhelming. But the fear isn't overwhelming. The responsibilities is overwhelming. And the fear is actually helping me deal with it.
Love that. I completely feel what you're saying is the fear, the sadness, it's all to guide us and to help us make these decisions. My friend was saying because was up in that place of just avoidance and she's hitting her car on things, scraping her car. She just was totally unembodied, right? And when we're in our bodies and we're feeling and we're in that center of gravity and we're allowing ourselves to feel everything, we can be in flow in the decisions that we're making in our life. And when we're not, there's no touch point to creation in the same way. Anyway, I don't know if I'm making sense in all this.
That is going to think to themselves, thank God I never had to feel anything, but it's if you're going to feel joy, you also are going to feel pain and fear. And fear is just a very uncomfortable feeling. And it's back to the equations. If you're in resistance to life, you're in resistance to 5,000 of your 10,000 children, it's going to consume your life. Emotions are just a small part of life, but if you're in resistance to even one of them, it is going to take over your entire experience, if only death. Like, if only I could get rid of, and it's the same with our wound. If only I could feel like I'm not enough, feel like I'm enough, if only I could get rid of not enough, get rid of not enough, get rid of not enough death. Like, we're never going to get rid of these wounds either. Can we just learn how to be in flow with them? And flow means intimacy. Can we just have intimacy with it, period? And in many ways, that's kind of the journey of the human being. How much can I just go with the river of this and see where it takes me, instead of trying to swim upriver or trying to change the river's going to take you wherever you're going to go. Why are we trying to train our brains? The brain works great, as long as we're in flow with it. Why are we trying to get rid of fear? Fear is awesome as long as we're in flow with it. So can we just go with the flow instead of letting things go or any of this nonsense? Like, just go with it. Like I did at that competition, drop by drop by drop, to become a mighty river. And that's what, when I was at my best as an athlete, I was able to accomplish. I also had resistance to fear as well, and it caused a lot of problems for me, but my whole life was about fear. So when you make your life all about one thing, you can have a resistant and an intimate relationship with that thing at the same time. And the goal can never be to have intimacy with all things at all time, because resistance is also part of life. But even if we have 0.001% more flow with our fear, just our divorces are so much simpler. And life just becomes a lot easier. And we're not trying to master our minds. And the mind's going to put up with that for a second. Like, mine is going to rebel so hard. So this is a Zen approach. I think that people think that Zen is only, going back to the analogy of the children, only being aligned with love, joy, gratitude, peace, and all of that. But actually, that's not Zen. That's the New Age movement. And we make fun of that on sitcoms. It doesn't work, right? Zen is actually seeing the wisdom that all of life has to offer and taking these other 5,000 children out of the basement and loving and nurturing them as well. And I would have said show off, but if you start telling people that I love my fear, people are going to think you're nuts, because that's not the social norm. I recently had a stalker who was looking into having me murdered. He left bombs at my house. I mean, it was breaking news. It was serious situation in my life, and he died. He committed suicide. But for 5 years, he terrorized my life. And I remember one time he was in the news. I ran into a friend of mine after 2 weeks later. And he's a life coach, this guy, not the stalker, the friend I ran into. And the friend said, "How are you feeling?" And I said, "Well, I'm really angry." And he's like, "Oh, you need to let that go. It's going to eat you from the inside out." And you know what I said to him? I said, "Don't try to rush me through my emotions so that you can feel more comfortable. They're here for a reason." Right? Yeah, we have to defend our right to have fear. We have to defend our right to have anger. We have to defend our right to have our innate wound, or our wound in general. Like, don't try to rush me through "I'm not enough." Don't try to tell me I am enough. Just let me be with it for a little while, because it's here to teach me and it's here to help make me stronger. And I want to have an intimate relationship with that too. Don't try to tell me to train my brain. I want to just have a healthy, intimate, flowing relationship with my own mind. And that's Zen.
What I hear though is what mastering your mind, or what it's the connotation of mastering, but what using your mind as a tool looks like is just full self-acceptance and acceptance of every energy and emotion that comes through you, and being in flow with that and not resisting. And that is actually self-mastery, right? Surrender.
No, let me explain the difference. Okay. A couple things. First of all, see wound, fear, and mind as people. And when you say, "Okay, I'm going to let you do your thing," can you see how offensive that is? That the way I can master you is to let you do your thing, or that I'm going to allow you to do your thing. There's no allowing. Fear's going to do whatever it's going to do. And do you see the difference?
So
It
I
still
do.
suggests that we have control over these three people.
Yeah, so I do a lot of IFS, like internal family systems. We go in and we meet the fearful one, right? We go in and we have conversations with the sad one, or with the anxious one, or and just that concept that we do have these, it's like parts. Like, you literally go in and you 3, 2, 1, see that part, and they're a person standing before you. We have these kind of parts just inside out, and I don't have an attachment of how real this is. I just know that the mind works in pictures and symbols and stories. But when we go in, there's real wisdom that comes from connecting and learning about these parts with curiosity of like, "Hey, how are you doing? And what's your purpose? And where did you come from? And when did you arrive in my psyche?" Right? And then saying, "This is how you're actually not helping me. This is how you're hurting me." And I do think there's a wise part that can lead these parts, that can guide and say, hey, let's work together in this way so that we can actually create the life that I want, you know?
So everything that I've been teaching is not my personal philosophy. I'm actually what's called a voice dialogue facilitator. And I've spoken to those parts, just like with parts therapy. And where my work differs in speaking to these parts, I don't call them parts, I call them voices, or I call them employees, or I call them children or roommates or what have you. And the family systems is that the family systems then has the comma. Okay, connect, be curious, like nice to meet you, comma, and then trying to get them to change who they are and how they operate to accommodate more what I want them to be like. And we ricochet right back to resistance. And so it can be done in a way that isn't disrespectful. I'm talking about 3 different voices in this case. Take fear, for example. If I say, okay, hey, can I reason with you? To just calm down because there's really nothing to be afraid of here. Fear is going to freak out thinking, oh my gosh, she's trying to get rid of me again. What kind of creature would try to deny fear its rightful place in her life? I'm back down in the basement. She's trying to tell me that I'm supposed to be more love. I'm not love. I'm fear, right? My job is to be fear. I come from the amygdala. The amygdala is going to do whatever it's going to do. It's like it comes back to this whole sense that we have control over these 3 people that live in our body, and that we're just have some sort of control over bending them to our will, versus the thought of just like, let them do whatever they're going to do. And there's the traditional number in Zen is 10,000. There's 9,997 other voices that will now have a chance to do their thing too, because I'm not spending all of my life trying to negotiate with these 3. So it's very subtle, and words matter. And I always run it through the filter because of being a voice dialogue facilitator. I mean, I've brokered conversations with people in their fear tens of thousands of times. And like I said, this is not my personal philosophy. This is what fear has told me. Fear's like, yeah, family systems, great, until after the comma, when there's a negotiation, and we're right back to resistance. So the levels are: resistance is level 1, not recommended. Acceptance is level 2, which you brought up, but we're still in our heads. Like, okay, neighbor or roommate that lives in my body, I'm not in resistance to you anymore. I'm accepting that you're there, but we're still dealing with these emotions intellectually. 3rd level is feeling. I just want to feel it, which happens without thought. We leave the mind behind. And then intimacy is where there's no separation between me and my fear. It's like I become it and it becomes me, and only there is this connection. And ironically, I as Kristen don't even exist anymore. Only the connection remains. And so there's no self for fear for scared to even show up, or thoughts for that matter. And you go into a flow state. And so it's the same thing with any discomfort. It becomes a spiritual experience when you connect in an intimate way, not trying to negotiate or use your mind intellectually to deal with these or reason with them or any of that. But it becomes a spiritual experience. And it's like that with anything. Wim Hof, cold. If you connect in an intimate way with your cold, it's a spiritual flow experience. If you connect with heat in a sweat lodge in an intimate way, it's a spiritual experience. If you connect with your wound in an intimate way, it's a spiritual experience. Fear with your own mind. So this is a very, it seems like it's a subtle difference between the finale of family parts versus what I'm suggesting, but it's worlds apart. And so that's why I'm kind of being a stickler about it, because words matter. And that's why I say, period, just connect with it, period. Intimacy if you can. And just you won't have to negotiate with them. They'll let go of you. It's like, I've had so many conversations with fear. I'm like, okay, hey, sweetheart, what's the deal? What do you need to tell me? All right, thank you. I appreciate you. And then it's gone. That's it. So simple. And yet so hard for us to do because of our conditioning.
Yeah. It really feels like that energy of talking to the fearful child, right? And just getting down on their level and going, hey, I see you. I see that you're scared. Like, what's going on? And just listening and not going, you don't need to be scared. I think a lot of times I was talking to a mom that I coach her daughter, and she was saying, that she was really upset and she feels like all her friends don't like her. And I was telling her, everyone likes you. We love you. You're so loved, right? And it's so easy for us as parents to want to fix it rather than just go, yeah, tell me more. Like, yeah, that's how you feel. It's okay to
Or
feel
like men wanting to fix things. Oh my gosh.
yeah, yeah, it's
Yeah,
fascinating.
I mean, I'm not a parent, but if I was in that situation, I'd be like, oh, that's got to be super painful for you to feel like there's something wrong with you or that nobody likes you. I felt that way too. Let's just sit and feel like there's something wrong with us together, or let's just feel like, and then we'll do a parade around the house like nobody likes us, and that'll period. That's it. That's what I do. Or, I had a client whose kid wouldn't go on the water slide. This 9-year-old boy, and dad kept saying, "There's nothing to be afraid of. There's nothing to be afraid of." I'm like, don't say that. What that is fear shaming people, or wound shaming, or thought shaming, or anger shaming, or we're shaming people for having these wounds and these fears. And I said, just say, yeah, the water slide is super scary. They actually designed it to be scary. That's what makes it so exciting, for people. So the question is, are you in the mood for fear right now?
Oh, I love that.
And the kid will be like, no, I'm not in the mood for fear. He's like, yeah, let's not be in the mood for fear together. And then a half an hour later, like, you could say to your boy, I'm in the mood for fear. I'm going to go on the water slide. Are you in the mood for fear? You're not? Okay, well, I'm going to go. And then you just keep saying that. There's no shaming the kid. And if you say things like, everybody loves you, there's nothing to be afraid of, you are guaranteeing your child a anxiety disorder or depression. It's like you're telling them there's something wrong with them for having a wound or having fear. We got to stop doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting, isn't it? That we are doing the exact opposite out of it. And yet it's the last thing that's actually helpful, right? You've literally blasted my mind open to a new way of feeling things, because I've been in so much resistance. My dad, when we would cry when we were kids, he'd say, "Don't cry," and we can see how when we were crying, it was just making him uncomfortable, right? And it came from he adores us. There was nothing that he was trying to traumatize, hurt us or anything, but it was just his natural reaction was like, stop it, stop crying, right? And so it became, but there's this little song on Daniel Tiger that says it's okay to cry. It makes everything feel better, or it's something to that effect. And I started to go like, oh, it's okay to cry. And I let myself cry, because before, when I would start to cry, I would say, don't cry, don't cry, don't cry. And the resistance made me cry harder, or made me stay in that cycle so much more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Then I just let myself cry. It's really fascinating how when we surrender to it and when we go into it, it would pass so much faster than when I was resisting it.
Here's what I do when I cry. There was a study done, 100 women crying. They were filmed crying, and then they were showed to 100 men. Guess what percentage of those men thought the crying women were sexy?
Huh.
95%.
No.
So whenever I'm crying, I don't even have to force myself. I just think I'm so sexy.
I love you. So great.
I'm so sexy. And I feel so beautiful when I cry too. It's so either you're sexy or you're just so beautiful. Vulnerability is so beautiful. And I want to go back to your question about I think you said it was a Tony Robbins workshop and how many men have felt afraid, because that's kind of what your podcast is centered around, is women's and their superpowers and all that. And maybe this would be a good place to finish, just to tell you what I see in that. We're all fear shamed, and men in particular are fear shamed, and they've all created their personalities around the I'm fearless kind of persona. It's not authentic. And I mean, imagine who you have to become to block out a roommate that's jumping up and down trying to scream at you, who's there 24/7 your entire life. Who do you have to become in order to block that out? Well, that's what we're looking at when we look at men. I mean, why are so many men so frustrating to be around? They're totally in denial of their fear, and that's what's considered masculine. And if they're allowed to feel any emotion, it's only anger, and that's sexy, but fear is not. And we're kind of contributing to it too. And so, and no man is absolutely willing to admit that they ever feel fear, ever. They might admit to anxiety, not realizing they're saying the same thing, but we would shame them for it, And so, the not safe, and that's tied with fear, of course, but on to women. So we are innately emotional creatures. We really feel things. Not completely, not everybody, but for the most part, men are more less emotional, and women are definitely more emotional. And that's seen as a flaw in women too. So we're embarrassed about our emotions, and so who do we become to not deal with our emotions, right? And how much effort and how much therapy and gratitude and love practice, and it's like everybody's working like dogs, men and women, to not deal with their fear. But let's say in a perfect world, we were to remove the fear shaming, and we were to remove the expectation that people are just going to be perfect, or the epitome of perfection, and just everybody just got in flow with everything. We dropped all of the shaming. Men, they still wouldn't feel that much. I mentioned emotions are only a small part of the experience. Oh, by the way, I want to say one more point. People are so in their heads to not deal with their fear, and they're so busy to not deal with their fear. Add that to the madness. So let's say we are all in flow with our emotions now. All of a sudden we have the freedom to just be who we are born to be, whatever our unique gifts are. But taking it into women, though, like, our innate gifts is our ability to feel things. And like, anger rights a wrong. Sadness opens our hearts for love and compassion for ourselves and for other people. Fear is a great advisor, and it's a source of aliveness and presence and focus. And it's like, as women, imagine how much more alive and willing to take risks, for that matter, and filled with, if you block out any emotion, you also inadvertently block out joy. Imagine how much more joy we'll have. I feel joy when I have fear, right? That's the bike tours and all that. Imagine what the world would be like if we got rid of fear shaming and we remove those barriers, and how magnificent women could then become, without apologizing for their crying, but actually just feeling pretty goddamn sexy about it.
I love it so much. Ah, you're amazing. You're so amazing. My biggest takeaways are just how powerful we can be in getting back into our bodies and embracing our feelings. And that question, are you in the mood for fear? And rather than making it wrong or making it right, just tuning into it and going, hey, here we are. Are you in the mood to grow and to move through this and stepping into it? There's just asking that powerful question when we feel it, and not making any of our feelings wrong, especially fear. And it's just been such an honor to have you here with me and on this podcast, but just to learn from you today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for the kudos. You make me feel nice.
You're amazing. Okay. Well, we'll talk again soon. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So how do you get someone to get into that fear if they're so in their head? You're like, okay, let's just feel it.
So my work is I first show them what their resistance habits are. It's usually many, and they're all always different. And then I would show them the costs of those habits. You know, now maybe he has an anxiety disorder, can't sleep, or doesn't get along with his wife, or has lower back pain that the doctors can't figure out what the problem is. And, you know, all of these things come from undealt with emotions. And then I showed them what the payoffs are. And then we'd weigh the payoffs versus the cost. And then he can decide whether he wants to actually learn how to feel again. And then there's a process of like, okay, feel an ice cube, you know, in your hand, and now feel the grass under your feet. And just even identifying a sensation of discomfort in your body. Like some people have horrendous, let's say, lower back pain, and are just like blocked it out, and you know, and it might be 90% undealt with fear. It's interesting. So, and then they take medication to block it out. And anyway, it's just pretty much everybody's personality and choices can be explained with their compromised relationship with fear, and everybody's problems can be explained. So, I mean, I'm so passionate about this work, but I'm so swimming upstream, and I'm doing the best I can. I'm, you know, but
It's really revolutionary. I mean,
yeah.
it's so different than so much of what I've been learning. And if I go into it and I just feel it, period. At a certain point, just like the child having the temper tantrum, it does fade away, or it does move into the next emotion. But it's not, I'm not consciously choosing the next emotion. I'm just feeling it and then allowing for whatever comes after that.
Yeah, it's like droplets of water through a hose, 10,000 droplets. It's like, here comes fear. As long as you're in flow with it, it'll be gone in 10 to 90 seconds. And then here comes joy, you know, and there's just always something flowing through the hose. A thought, here comes a thought, here comes a negative thought, right? Here comes a positive thought. It's like, can we learn how to just have intimacy with it all? I mean, even if it's just 0.01% more intimacy, it's so much easier. And then there's always room for something else to enter. Like that day in the competition, I was in flow with it all for 2 hours. Like I wasn't trying to replace anything else with, I got this. There's, you know, I'm not an imposter. I just
positive affirmations.
Yeah, like none of that. I just went with it all. And then by the time I got in the gate, you know, step B is because I'm totally an empty vessel, because nothing's stuck behind a king toes that I'm fighting a war against. It's actually all here to serve me and help me be magnificent. I then clapped my poles and shifted into the badass, and I could choose to be anything I want. But too often people have gratitude practice as a way to override an uncomfortable feeling. But you can still do the gratitude practice, just have gratitude for the uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
You know,
or it's like, you know, gratitude for the hard things, gratitude for the difficult relationships, gratitude for the struggles, right?
That period. And then if you have gratitude practice as a way to override your discomfort, that's one experience. That's spiritual bypass. But if you have gratitude practice when you're feeling really good, that's different. That's just gratitude practice. You're not using it as a tool to override anything. And so I'm a big fan of yoga and gratitude practice and meditation, all these things. But when we use them in order to feel better, then it's spiritual bypassing.
It's like, I heard, never drink to feel better, just drink to feel even better. Even yoga, do yoga to feel even better, but don't try to do it to feel better. In that, don't do it to be in avoidance. Don't use things to go into avoidance, no matter what it is, breath work, or if we're using it to go into basically spiritual bypassing and using it to cover up the shit rather than just like presencing what is and live our best life, then it's not as helpful, right?
Yeah, and I've talked to fear about this at length, and people can become, I won't say addicted, but dependent upon if I don't do yoga every day, my anxiety is just overwhelming. Or if I don't meditate 2-3 times a day, then my life falls apart. That's spiritual bypassing. And to fear, taking a pill or smoking pot or doing meditation every day or yoga every day in order to not deal with it's all the same thing. It's just more socially acceptable, but it's just more resistance and more ways to not deal with their fear.
Yeah. So the formulas, go into it and see it. And it's actually to bring in the gratitude is just to say, wow, I feel that. Thank you. And then feel the next thing. Thank you. And
Well,
feel
again,
the joy. Thank you.
yeah, too much work, too busy.
And no, thank you.
But no, I mean, I
You
wouldn't
can
even.
fear. Like,
No.
oh, I see fear. Thank you.
Yeah. If you're having an intimate experience with a man, you know, if you stop to say, hey, I just want to thank you, right? You're just broken the intimacy, right? If you're trying to figure out what's going on, you know, between you and the guy, all of a sudden you're not having an intimate experience anymore, right? I mean, if you are trying to figure out what to do, you're in your head. You're no longer in that flow state. You know, the second you start thinking about it or trying to figure out what to do next, you're not in the flow state. So just super simple. If you're simple, connect with it in an intimate way. And even if it's for just 1 second, it's totally life-changing. Especially if somebody's been in resistance to it their whole lives.
Yeah. It's a completely new way of living.
It is. And it's not something that is sustainable every moment of every day, but we can get better at it. Fear doesn't keep anybody stuck. They're stuck in their resistance.
Relationship with fear keeps them stuck.
Yeah, they're compromised relationship.
Yeah, it's really good.
Fear
Just my language around that.
Yeah, it's so conditioned though. I get it. It's like I only see fear as a good thing. I only see fear as a good thing. Fear does not hold anybody back from anything. It is a gift from the universe. I only see it as a good thing. It's our relationship with fear that messes us up.
Our resistance to fear.
And resistance is a catch-all word for everything. And probably the reason why I feel like I was in Art of Impossible, the book written by Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis. And our relationship, well, the reason why I can do these things that had never been done before athletically is because it wasn't just me. I had 10,000 different employees or voices or children working on my behalf, including, you know, I'm too much, I'm not enough, fear, anger, you know, sadness, despair, imposter syndrome, embarrassment, like all of these 10,000 voices were here to support me being magnificent. Versus if I'm even at war with even one of them, that'll be my entire life. It's so simple when you just put it that way, you know.
How are they working for you?
Fear is not that big of a deal, but if we are in resistance to it, even the slightest bit, our resistance patterns will take over our entire lives and fear will just become our controller. If you're in flow with it, it's just no big deal. And that's why at the dinner table, when I said, like, I've been sexually assaulted multiple times, it doesn't faze me. I mean, it's upsetting and I'm pissed and I'm upset and I'm like, I had an ex-boyfriend break into my house a couple times and rape me and pull my hair out and threaten to kill me and all these crazy things. And it was awful, but it's like, I was over it 3 days later because I was in flow with all these things. And I'm not to say that I do this all the time. I certainly didn't do it with my marriage because I was divorced because I'm still in love with my husband. And it's like I get a payoff for being in resistance to my emotions because I get to stay feeling like I have a relationship with him, for example. So there's payoffs, but if you're in flow with this stuff, you don't develop PTSD. It's not that big of a deal. It's just fucking life, right? Mm-hmm. Like when I'm writing my next book, it's about anxiety. I'm like, oh, well, geez, I'm talking about PTSD and I'm talking about resilience and I'm talking about who develops PTSD and who doesn't. And I actually had the thought well, I haven't gone through much trauma. I've kind of gone through no trauma. And then I'm like, wait a second. I've been raped several times. I've had guns pointed at me 3 times. I had a stalker that terrorized my life for 5 years. I had a surgeon do experimental surgery on me that crippled me for life. I picked up hitchhiking by some guy who threatened to rape, sodomize, and murder me. And I was in his van for, I don't know, an hour with him screaming at me. And I was mostly amused. That one I got therapy for. I mean, the list of things is,
and yet your nervous system doesn't feel like it has PTSD. Like fundamentally it goes, oh, I don't have any trauma.
I feel like my fear levels are on par with my life situation. I don't feel like it's excessive. No. And I have a lot of fear, and I'm very protective of my sleep, especially as I get older. I've had 12 surgeries. I'm just more protective of my body and my time and my energy. But no, I feel like, and the question of my next book is your fear in proportion to your life situation, or is it out of proportion? I feel like my fear is in proportion to my life situation.
Huh.
The biggest fear I have is trying to get this work out there. And once this next book comes out, it's going to be very controversial because I'm picking apart anxiety healthcare treatments and saying, hey, it's not going to work. I'm trying to do it in a gentle way, but it's still going to piss a lot of people off. I mean, imagine somebody who's 75 years old, who's been teaching overcoming fear their whole lives, reading this book, or big pharma or what have you. So grief is another one of those 5,000 voices that we typically, but people are writing a book about the gifts of grief, the gift of sadness, the gift of anger, right? We're starting to move in the direction of being in flow with everything, but we're not there yet, obviously. Good luck. If you have any questions, just reach out.
No, I just so appreciate you. Thank you, and have an amazing trip.
Yeah, and I know that I just dropped a bomb on you, and you're probably like, what?
Oh yeah. I'll be thinking about it and like re-listening and taking note. Like I really will, because it's a completely new way of looking at the world. So yeah, thank you.
My goal in this work, 100% right now, is to reverse anxiety disorders. And that's what my next book is about. And I'm just trying to get people in flow with their fear so that anxiety disorders become a thing of the past. And so it's my reason for being. I realize it's the reason why I was a professional athlete, just to figure this stuff out. I realize it contradicts everybody else. And my book is going to be probably not controversial because you can't argue with my logic, but I think it's going to really upset a lot of people. And because they can't make my message wrong because it's such a no-brainer. Then I worry that they're going to do something called ad hominem, which is attack me as a person. And so this is a very scary thing I'm trying to do. And I'm really trying to change the world. And it's no small thing because people are so conditioned the way that you've been talking. Wish me luck. So.
I know. And I do want to just give you the feedback that like when I expressed my fears and you just said, that makes sense. It was so calming to my nervous system. It was so different than, well, think about it this way or whatever. And having had my mind blown by the way that you told me these things, and having taught these things for years and being told you're not doing it right actually felt really good. So I don't know how everyone will respond, but for me, it's been enlightening and will shift the way I do my work. It's been really cool. So thank you.
You're so smart, and you have such great presence and energy, and I'm just honored to be your friend, and I thank you for bringing me on your podcast.
Have an amazing trip. Thank you. I look forward to next time we get to see each other.
Bye.